coach I or anybody else ever encountered. He took care of every specific detail. He actually scouted that ball club during the war years when he coached at Great Lakes. He found Marion Motley and Max Speedy and Dante Lavelli, the great Otto Graham, Willis and Ford and all those people. He was meticulous in every detail with that team. They were not ragtag. They were first-rate.
Paul Brown teams also lent new meaning to the word offense.
And the Giants, under Coach Steve Owens, emphasized defense. But Paul Brown's offense was different in that where most teams complemented their running game with passing, the Browns complemented their passing game with a good run.
It was also a constant about Paul Brown and his team, and that constant, I think, was criticism. The man was always under criticism, if not only from fans and from opposing players, it was from his own players and from the press. But the bottom line about Paul Brown is that he was a winner.
The All-American Conference was born in 1946 as World War II ended. The Cleveland franchise was formed in the image of its head coach, a dapper man named Paul Brown. Fittingly, he called his creation the Cleveland Browns and devised a wide-open T formation which featured sideline patterns. These routes exploited the defenses of the day, which lacked outside linebackers. During the war years, Brown had scouted and signed talent like quarterback Otto Graham from Northwestern University and a huge, graceful fullback named Marion Motley from the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. The All-American Conference was simply overrun by Brown's battalions as Cleveland won 4 straight league championships. Behind it all was Paul Brown, who owned the shrewdest, most active brain that had ever been bent on the simple game of football. Today, his purposeful stride still influences the game as general manager of the Cincinnati Bengals.
It was something that just grew larger and larger, and winning begets winning. Once you're a champion, you find out how nice that is. If we had people that we couldn't live with in our football, who couldn't bring themselves to live within our rules or pay the price that we thought it took to win, I moved them on and made no apologies for it.
Brown never had to apologize for number 60. Perhaps no player better exemplified Brown's strict Midwestern ideals than Otto Graham, all-American boy and family man. What's more, this Jack Armstrong could play.
Well, Otto Graham, and I say this and mean it sincerely, I think was the greatest quarterback of all time. I don't know of anybody I've ever known who could see the entire field and pick out the right guy to throw the ball to. You name me some other quarterback that took his team into 11 championships. He was an All-American basketball player, played in the Pro League for a while. And as a golfer, tremendous. He's near a scratch even today after having a bout with cancer.
Otto Graham won his bout with cancer in New London, Connecticut, where he is ranking captain and athletic director at the United States Coast Guard Academy.
I think the prime factor in our winning was Paul Brown, because he would start off every year and say to us, "You were champions last year. That doesn't mean a darn thing." So every year we'd start off and he would say, "We have to go through everything from the very beginning again." And we would sit there and he would dictate and we'd write these things down, you know, and it got a little tiresome, writing down how to run, how to do calisthenics, and this type of thing. But we did it every doggone year. If anybody had any tendency to become a little bit fat-headed and, you know, and as he says, ripe, he took it out of us in a hurry. He did not allow prima donnas on his football team.
All the prima donnas resided in the NFL on teams like the New York Giants under head coach Steve Owens.
The Giants were Steve Owens, the coach, and Steve was no jolly fat man. But Steve had the different offense than anybody else. His offense was the A formation.
New York's A formation reflected the plodding nature of NFL offenses during this period. But in 1948, the Giants signed number 42, Charlie Connolly. Connolly had been an All-American tailback in Mississippi, and his arm pumped life into the old A formation. Connolly had gray in his hair even then. Today, at the age of 59, Connolly lives in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where he owns a shoe store and remembers his role as perennial Giant veteran.
When I first came with the Giants, I guess they listed me as 24 years old. But I was 27 because I'd been in college and I went in World War II for 3 years. My offensive players, linemen, the guys who were blocking for me, kind of felt sorry for me because I was a little older. When the guards, say, for example, it missed a block, some of my teammates would come back and apologize, where I would tell them, "You're killing me, you're hurting me," and I think my age helped me quite a bit with them.
So while Charlie was working on his A, Otto was brushing up his T. The two would not meet until Cleveland joined the NFL in 1950.
Well, while the Giants in their A formation were winning everything in the NFL, the All-American Conference was simply no contest. And I guess, Marty, really, it was only a matter of time until the National Football League just had to say to the Cleveland Browns and, in fact, to two other teams in the All-American Conference, okay, come on in. But the Browns had a little test waiting. The first game they played in the National Football League was tough.
Tough. It was against the Philadelphia Eagles, the National Football League champions, and Commissioner Burt Bell wanted to really test those Browns against Steve Van Buren and Bosh Pritchard and a marvelous Philadelphia Eagle team. And the Eagles were really walloped in that ball game. I think the final was 35-10 or something like that. The Browns came in a hurry. They didn't arrive. They were there.
Well, the Browns, of course, as we mentioned, all offense. And all of a sudden, I guess, the experienced people in the NFL and the establishment just kind of had to sit up and take notice.
They sure did. And particular notice was taken by the New York Giants.
So it didn't take too long for the Cleveland Browns to bounce into the National Football League, and all of a sudden, the establishment was believers.
New York City's lunch hour crush swirls around Allie Sherman, once head coach of the Giants, now a television executive. Sherman looks back to 1950, when as a Giant assistant, he scouted Cleveland in its first NFL game against the Philadelphia Eagles.
The first time I ever scouted the Browns, I realized after the first 20 plays, this is the first time I'd ever seen this happen. Here's a ball club who had run 20 plays, and 15 of those plays, they threw the ball on 15 plays. It's remarkable. The Eagles used man-to-man coverage. There's no way they were going to be able to stay with Lavelli and Speedy and Jones and Graham throwing that ball. They just took the Eagles out of it, totally.
Cleveland won 35-10 and left a lasting impression.
These babies could throw the ball, these babies could play defense, and they were football players, and one heck of a football team.
By the time Cleveland and New York met in the season's third week, a plan to neutralize Graham's passing attack had been devised. The Giants swarmed all over the Browns, led by number 49, defensive back Tom Landry. Cleveland's sideline patterns had never been shut off so effectively.
We came up with what got to be known as the umbrella defense. As soon as Graham got the ball from center and showed pass, Ray Poole and Jim Duncan, they were defensive ends that never played linebacker in their lives, but they were drilled to drop 8 yards at 45-degree angles. In fact, actually what they became were the first linebackers in what became a 4-3-4 that way. And that was the start of this great rivalry.
The umbrella dealt Paul Brown his only 2 losses that first NFL season, setting up a playoff in frigid Cleveland for the Eastern Division title. This time, Graham went to crossing patterns underneath the umbrella. Meanwhile, the Cleveland defense stopped Charlie Connolly cold as the Browns beat New York 8-3 and moved on to the NFL championship against the Los Angeles Rams.
Rosa will attempt a field goal. It'll be 15 yards. He boots the ball. It's up in the air. It's gone!
The outsiders from the lesser league were now champions of the world. Throughout the glory years of the early 50s, the magic touch of the Brownies transformed all those who wore the uniform. Paul Brown's system turned out 40 future NFL coaches, including number 65, Chuck Noll. Also matriculating were Walt Michaels, Mike McCormick, Don Shula, and fun-loving Abe Gibron.
Abe Gibron is the type of person that everybody should have on their team. He's the kind of guy who keeps you loose. He wasn't quite as big then as he is now. He's Lebanese, of course, and we go to training camp, and all night long, Abe would play those Lebanese records, you know, the Arab records we used to call them, you know, all these dance musics, and we would all scream, "Abe, shut that doggone thing off," you know, and you go down to his room, he'd be in there dancing away, fooling around. You know, you fully expected to see a snake pop out of a box or a cobra or something with his head flashing back and forth. We had a great time, though, really. A guy like that is a must for any football team.
Abe lives near Tampa, Florida, where as defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, his sense of humor remains intact.
It was a togetherness, a family with the Browns, and those are things that you miss. You know, one guy was in trouble, everybody was in trouble. A guy got in a fight in a tavern, and that next night there was 50 Browns down there. It was like a family. Today it's big business, and it's not that togetherness like it was, but we dominated the league. You know, we won 10, 11 in a row every year for 5 or 6 years. And that's why the rivalry with the Giants was so great. They're the only team that ever beat us, and everybody couldn't figure out why.
Paul Brown actually built up that rivalry more than anybody else, because Paul honestly did not like New York City. Paul Brown, I think, is a small-town boy at heart. Whenever he went to New York, he wanted to get out as quickly as possible, with a victory, of course.
We became the special object of the New York people, and the media helped do it. It was during those days that I became the cold, deadly, brutal, you know, all that image thing that went with it.
Brown's image was just grand for box office as the mid-50s brought a change of tempo to pro football. New York was out of the A and into Charlie Connolly hooking up with number 16, Frank Gifford. Gifford was a California boy whose versatility gave Cleveland fits. The Browns' trump card was still ageless Otto Graham, now wearing number 14, but up to the same old tricks. In 1955, after leading his team into their 10th straight championship game, Otto said it was good and retired.
So Otto Graham was gone. Paul Brown says he's the greatest. Marty, what do you think?
He was certainly among the greatest. The finest pure passer I ever saw was Sammy's coach I or anybody else ever encountered. He took care of every specific detail. He actually scouted that ball club during the war years when he coached at Great Lakes. He found Marion Motley and Max Speedy and Dante Lavelli, the great Otto Graham, Willis and Ford and all those people. He was...
But the bottom line about Paul Brown is that he was a winner.
The All-American Conference was born in 1946 as World War II ended. The Cleveland franchise was formed in the image of its head coach, a dapper man named Paul Brown.
Running game with passing, the Browns complemented their passing game with a good run.
It was also a constant about Paul Brown and his team, and that constant, I think, was criticism. The man was always under criticism, if not only from fans and from opposing players, it was from his own players and from the press.
Fittingly, he called his creation the Cleveland Browns and devised a wide-open T formation which featured sideline patterns. These routes exploited the defenses of the day, which lacked outside linebackers.
Meticulous in every detail with that team. They were not ragtag. They were first-rate.
Paul Brown teams also lent new meaning to the word offense.
And the Giants, under Coach Steve Owens, emphasized defense. But Paul Brown's offense was different in that where most teams complemented their